Hello everyone. Last Saturday, my son and I went to a rocket launching testing facility in the Mojave Desert. We had several rockets to try, and I would like to share with you one of the rockets that is actually quite interesting. So let me start it here. So this is the rocket right here. We are shooting from the safe distance. It is equipped with the G motor, a single rocket engine. This is the largest motor that you can get without being licensed. And once you're licensed, you can go to higher motors, of course. But this is a pretty real deal. And you can also see the camera installed over here. So once we see the footage from the viewer's side, then we can also examine it from this camera side. So just see what happened.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Woo! And we have a spectacular failure. Very, very embarrassing in front of 50 to 100 people once again.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Woo!
That was hurt.
All right. Well, let me pause here and let's go to the footage recorded by that camera there and see that same failure from up close. Okay, so here is that recording from up close from the camera. As I play it, you'll hear the ringing sound. That's the proximity alert. So as you can see, the engine is, there's an igniter that's inserted inside of the engine nozzle. There's electric wires. They go into a box that is triggered by remote control. So when it's making that ringing sound, that's proximity alert. That means that it's ready for the final firing sequence. So you're not supposed to be closer than 30 feet to this particular rocket. Now, once the ignition is started, the igniter will go off here. That will start the engine, and the rocket itself is mounted on this metal rod with two mounting lugs. One lug here, it's white. The other lug is here, it's red. So if all goes well, once the engine develops the thrust, the rocket is supposed to simply fly away, guided by the rod, and into the sky. But let's see what happens here.
2, 1.
The engine finished its burn, and that was the ejection charge that's supposed to happen way up in the air to eject the chute that is basically burning right there. And at this point they turned off the launch sequence, and now they're gonna put out fire, etc., etc. So again, let's watch it one more time.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Notice how one of the lugs ripped off from the rocket and simply slides back down that rod. Okay, so let me get back and re-watch it in a frame-by-frame mode.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So I'm pausing here and let's watch it frame by frame. So we have the rocket igniter, so electric igniter is starting. You see that little plume of smoke coming out. Now remember, each frame here takes, we have a 30 frames per second video, so each frame takes about 1/30th of a second. Okay, so this is second frame, third frame. So now the engine is starting to burn inside. It takes several frames, like about 6 to 10 frames, for the thrust to start to develop. So now you see the fire is starting to come out of that nozzle. So we continue. Now the thrust is fully developing, takes another 10 frames or so. This is the point where the engine is reaching its full burn. So now you have enough lifting force that will start moving this rocket. So if I click the next frame, as you see, the rocket is now propelled forward. So the thrust of the engine is now exceeds the weight of the rocket, and it's pushing it up, guided by the rod. So that's frame number 1, happens at the second number 5 into this short video. And this is basically the point of our liftoff. Then the second frame, third frame, and the third frame, as you can see, the engine has already developed that full nice jet of the stream. By the time we reach frame 5, which is about 1/6 of a second since the moment of takeoff, notice this flare. It is not supposed to be there. All the fire is supposed to go down because the engine is basically a one cylindrical tube that's sealed everywhere except at the bottom, so that the fire, the gases are escaping in a downward direction. But this flare indicates that the side of the engine tube has actually burst. And this is the engine that we purchased. We had to assemble some parts of it, but that particular part of the engine near the exhaust nozzle was already pre-assembled, and it's clearly being ruptured here. Notice in the next frame, that side flare disappears. Now the engine looks like it's developed full thrust, but in the next frame, once again, even bigger flare occurs. So that rupture is starting to grow. And on the next frame, so it literally took place, happened within 4 or 5 frames, which is less than 1/6 of a second. Now we lost thrust. There's no more propelling force that pushes the rocket up. So it continues on inertia, gets stuck at the end of the rod, topples over, rips one of these lugs apart, the bottom red one, and falls down, which is exactly what is going to happen. So if I skip about 30 frames, which is about a second, now you see how the rocket is falling down. There's no thrust. This is just some fireworks. There's some stuff is being spit out from the engine nozzle. And as it hits the ground, and it happens very quickly, an additional impact ruptures the engine more, so it starts expelling all those hot gases to the side, and then it expels even more, and then it ultimately bursts in flames and starts all that massive fire as the rest of the propellant is being burned down. So, and it takes about 8 seconds for the main burn to finish. So I'm actually running it with lots of frames now. And then by the time it hits 14 seconds, remember it started, the liftoff was around second number 5. So about 9-10 seconds after the main burn is finished. And now the engine is literally finished, and the rest of the rocket body is just burning. So we have this residual fire, and the whole rocket has been destroyed. And so once again, let's watch it in slow motion.
4, 3, 2, 1.
So now notice the ignition. The engine is developing thrust. We have a liftoff. On the frame 4, we have a side burst. The engine is compromised. On frame 6, it's even bigger. On frame 7, the thrust is fully lost. The rocket is no longer having enough propelling force. It rips off of the rod and starting to fall down. And as it falls down, the engine ruptures even more, producing this spectacular engine fire that you can see here. It's basically burning through the side crack, destroying the rest of the rocket. And once by second, this is about 9-10 seconds into the flight, the engine stops the burn, and then you have just the residual fire on the rocket. Okay, And again, let's play it in real time.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It's gonna be the ejection charge right now. That was the ejection charge. That's it. And of course, the technicians came up and put down the fire once again.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, so that was our first experiment, and of course we had a successful rocket launch with other rockets afterwards, and we also had successful launches before, but this one ended up being a flop. But fortunately, it's nothing that we did wrong, as the analysis of the footage presents. It's clearly a faulty rocket engine, which actually it does happen apparently. This is one of the examples. It cost us a rocket, which is too bad. I spent about 2 weekends putting it together, my son and I. It's also quite a bit of an embarrassment, but hey, this is also a great learning experience. And in engineering, you learn a lot more from the failures than what you learn from the successes. Incidentally, this is the exact same type of failure that happened to the space shuttle Challenger back in 1980s. Remember one of the RSB, the rocket solid boosters, RSBs, which has exact same principle as the engine that's running here. So one of those SRBs ruptured because of the faulty O-ring on the side that produced the side burn through that wall of the solid rocket booster, and that side burn ignited the main tank, and of course it resulted in a spectacular explosion and a very grave, a very bad loss of life. Those who remember, I remember, like back in 1980s, I watched it on TV. That was quite a tragedy. So these things happen, and this is just one example that shows what happens when the engine wall is ruptured and how devastating it is for the rocket. And also imagine if you were standing right next to this launch site, that could have been a pretty scary experience, you know. That's why the rules require for the rockets of this class to stay at least 30 feet away. And we were actually staying from within the bunker, and I put that camera within several feet from the rocket just to be able to capture some of this footage, which is glad I did, because it allows us to examine what happened and make a great learning experience out of it. Anyways, hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.